Hello, steadfast Taurus. There are seasons when your greatest strength is knowing what deserves to be held onto. And then there are seasons when life quietly asks whether what you have carried for 15 years still belongs in your hands. 15 is not a number you need to fear, and it is not a promise written somewhere in the stars. Here it represents the long accumulation of choices, attachments, and familiar ways of surviving that may finally be reaching a point of change. You may already recognize the first signs without knowing what to call them. There is a particular kind of tiredness that sleep cannot quite touch, or a relationship, responsibility, or situation that seems strangely familiar even though the faces and circumstances have changed. What of the stability you worked so hard to preserve has gradually become something you are maintaining simply because you have forgotten what life feels like without it? That question can feel uncomfortable for Taurus because endurance is rarely meaningless to you. As fixed earth, you may naturally place great value on what has proven dependable. The people who stayed, the work you built, slowly the routines that give shape to your days, and the commitments into which you have poured real time and care. Yet something can remain standing long after it has stopped growing, and that distinction may be becoming harder to ignore now. From the outside, your life may still look solid. You may still show up, fulfill your responsibilities, keep familiar routines moving, and reassure yourself that nothing is seriously wrong, while somewhere underneath that steady surface, something feels increasingly compressed. Like soil walked over for too many seasons, everything can appear firm above ground even while air and water are struggling to reach the roots. No one begins life knowing what must be preserved and what can safely be released. Those instincts are learned slowly, often in places where predictability once meant safety, where being dependable helped you feel needed, or where sudden change taught you to value anything that stayed consistent. Without consciously choosing it, you may have learned that holding things together was one of the surest ways to protect what mattered. And for a long time, that lesson may have served you beautifully. It could have helped you become loyal when other people disappeared, patient when circumstances became difficult, and capable of building something substantial instead of abandoning it at the first sign of discomfort. But a shelter that once protected you can eventually become too small for the person you have grown into, and recognizing that does not erase the years when it genuinely kept you safe. Have you ever noticed how certain chapters of your life seem to return wearing different clothes? Perhaps it is another relationship in which loyalty slowly becomes obligation, another secure job that gradually asks you to trade too much aliveness for predictability, or another responsibility you continue carrying because everyone, including you, has grown accustomed to seeing it in your hands. The details change, yet underneath them you may hear the same question. Am I protecting something that still has value, or am I protecting it because it is familiar? This is where the idea of a 15-year karmic pattern becomes useful as a symbol rather than a sentence imposed on you. Think of 15 years as accumulated seasons, enough time for endurance to become routine and routine to become so deeply rooted that it begins to feel indistinguishable from identity. Karma, viewed this way, is less about punishment and more about what naturally develops when the same emotional soil is cultivated in the same way for a very long time. And when such a pattern begins loosening, life does not necessarily announce it through catastrophe. There may be no dramatic breakup, sudden resignation, financial upheaval, or unmistakable sign telling you that one chapter has run its course. More often, the first messenger is exhaustion, the strange realization that you can rest your body and still wake up feeling as though some deeper part of you has been carrying something through the night. You might take time off, sleep longer, eat better, simplify your schedule, and still feel that quiet heaviness waiting underneath. It can resemble a plant whose roots have filled every inch of its container. Nothing appears obviously broken, and the leaves may even remain green. Yet there is no longer enough room for unseen growth to continue naturally. The container was never the enemy. It simply belonged to an earlier stage of the plant's life. There is a protective instinct beneath this pattern, and it can operate before conscious thought catches up. When change approaches, you may find yourself reaching for what has already proven reliable, calculating what could be lost, remembering how much time you invested. or telling yourself that enduring a little longer is safer than disturbing everything you have built. Repeated often enough, preservation stops feeling like a decision and begins to feel like personality. That is where Taurus can encounter one of the quieter paradoxes of strength. The ability to hold steady is genuine power, but strength becomes expensive when it requires you to keep supporting structures that no longer support you in return. Sometimes what looks like extraordinary resilience from the outside is also the private labor of keeping an old season alive, because allowing it to change feels more frightening than continuing to carry its weight. If you recognize yourself here, the heaviness you feel may deserve a different interpretation. It may not mean that you have suddenly become less patient, less loyal, or less capable of handling the life you built. It may mean that something within you has finally begun distinguishing between endurance that nourishes your future and attachment that survives mainly because it has survived for so long. And that distinction raises a deeper question. Who are you when you no longer have to prove your strength by holding everything in place? If the responsibility, relationship, routine, or identity you have protected for years begins to loosen, does your security disappear with it? Or do you finally discover that some of your stability was never stored in those things at all? Perhaps what feels like the loosening of a 15-year pattern is not asking you to abandon the ground beneath your feet, but to notice whether that ground still has enough space, air, and nourishment for the person you are becoming. There is an important difference between creating a life that looks secure and building an inner foundation that actually supports you. For Taurus, that distinction can be especially meaningful because you may become deeply invested in what you have patiently built: the relationship you protected, the work you stayed committed to, the routines that gave your days a dependable shape. Sometimes the work is not about bringing something new into your life at all, but looking carefully at what is already there and asking whether your time, care, energy, and loyalty are still being placed where life can grow. If you have stayed with this thought long enough to feel something shifting inside you, you may recognize the strange mixture that comes with it. There can be relief in finally finding language for an old heaviness, while another part of you feels uneasy, because naming a pattern means you can no longer pretend you do not see it. And once daily routines return, the familiar tasks, responsibilities, messages, bills, and expectations, that clarity can easily become buried beneath everything you already know how to carry. So tell me in the comments, where in your life have you been holding on longer than you truly want to? Maybe it is a relationship, a career path, a financial habit, a responsibility, or simply a version of yourself that once gave you security. At what point does something familiar become so woven into your identity that you can no longer tell whether you still choose it or have simply become accustomed to carrying it? That question matters because there is a profound difference between karma imagined as punishment and karma understood as consequence. You do not need to picture some invisible authority recording every year you remain somewhere too long, every promise you kept after it became painful, or every time you chose predictability because uncertainty frightened you. Sometimes what we call karma is much quieter than that. It is simply what accumulates when the same choice is planted in the same emotional soil, season after season. Think of a field that has been cultivated continuously without being given enough time to recover. Nothing is punishing the earth when it becomes depleted. The soil is simply showing the consequences of what has repeatedly been taken from it, without sufficient restoration. Human endurance can work in much the same way, especially when you become so accustomed to being reliable that you forget reliability also requires replenishment. Consider how ordinary this can look in your own life. Perhaps you keep returning to the same family responsibility because everyone knows you will handle it. Stay in the dependable job because the paycheck feels safer than uncertainty. Or continue maintaining a relationship routine because so many years have already been invested there. Maybe you keep possessions, obligations, or expectations long after their usefulness has changed because releasing them feels strangely similar to admitting that the years you gave them no longer mattered. Yet something having changed does not make the years you invested in it meaningless. A home can shelter you faithfully and still become too small. A field can feed you through many seasons and still need to rest. A relationship can have been real and valuable without being required to remain exactly as it was forever. This is where Taurus can begin separating loyalty from permanence, because honoring what something once gave you does not require you to preserve its old form indefinitely. Taken individually, these decisions rarely look serious enough to explain deep emotional exhaustion. Staying another month, accepting another responsibility, postponing another change, or telling yourself one more time that things are good enough can seem almost harmless. That is precisely why the pattern can survive for years. Each moment looks too small to challenge, while together they slowly form the architecture of a life. Over time, what began as patience can become an assigned role. People may come to know you as the one who stays, the one who can be depended upon, the one who does not abandon something simply because it has become difficult. Those qualities can be beautiful expressions of strength, but when you are never allowed to reconsider what deserves that strength, perseverance can quietly become a contract you do not remember signing. Seeing this changes the emotional meaning of the pattern. If there is no cosmic force demanding that you continue paying for choices made years ago, then the possibility of change also returns to your hands. You do not need to condemn your former self for seeking security. You can understand why that version of you needed solid ground, while also noticing that the ground beneath you may be asking for a different kind of care now. And this is where self-judgment can become particularly heavy. You may tell yourself, I should be able to keep doing this. I have handled it for years, as though your previous ability to carry something proves that you must carry it indefinitely. But endurance is not an unlimited resource, and comparing your capacity with someone else's ignores the private history that taught you why stability, predictability, and being needed became so important in the first place. For some people, change was allowed to be ordinary. For you, uncertainty may have once carried a much sharper emotional cost, teaching you to build security through consistency, tangible results, dependable routines, or becoming the person others could always count on. When those lessons sink deep enough, changing direction can feel less like making a new decision and more like disturbing the foundation beneath your own feet. That is also why the same pattern can appear in more than one part of life. The partner may change the workplace, may change the financial circumstances, may improve, and the responsibilities may take different forms, yet you can still find yourself occupying a familiar position. The one who stays a little longer, gives the situation more time, protects what has already been built, and waits for the old investment to become worthwhile again. Different fields perhaps, but the same instinct to keep tending the ground because walking away from something cultivated for years feels almost impossible. At work, this may look like remaining in a reliable position long after your curiosity has gone quiet, or becoming the person who keeps a difficult project alive because abandoning it would make all the effort already spent feel wasted. In relationships, it may mean measuring value by longevity, believing that because something has survived many seasons, survival itself must be evidence that it should continue unchanged. With money or material security, it may appear as clinging to an old strategy simply because it once protected you, even when your present life is asking for a different relationship with safety. The deeper pattern is not that Taurus cannot change. It may be that you can become extraordinarily skilled at preserving what once mattered, so skilled that preservation continues long after renewal has begun asking for room. And when that happens, the question is no longer whether you are strong enough to keep holding on. You have already answered that many times. The more revealing question is whether everything you have been preserving still deserves the same portion of your life. Your energy is a resource, your attention is a resource, your loyalty is a resource, and even the richest soil becomes depleted when every season demands a harvest without returning anything to the ground. Replenishing yourself is not a betrayal of everything you have built. It is part of maintaining any life sturdy enough to keep growing. Perhaps that is the harder realization beneath this entire pattern. The problem was never that you valued stability too much, but that somewhere along the way, you may have begun treating your own growth as the one thing stability was allowed to restrict. What once protected your roots may now be pressing against them, and the question quietly taking shape is not whether you should destroy what you built, but whether you are ready to give those roots enough room for whatever they are trying to become next. Think about soil that has been pressed down season after season. From above, it can still look firm and dependable, almost untouched. But beneath the surface, the spaces that once allowed water and air to reach the roots have slowly disappeared. Something similar can happen when you have spent years holding the same responsibilities, protecting the same structures, and asking yourself to endure, because endurance has always been one of the ways you create safety. As a long pattern begins to loosen, the first signs may seem almost embarrassingly small. A careless remark that you once would have ignored suddenly stays with you. A last-minute request feels heavier than it should, or another responsibility placed in your hands produces irritation instead of the familiar instinct to simply handle it. You may even surprise yourself and wonder why your patience seems thinner when, in reality, your patience may simply be telling you how much it has already carried. That distinction matters, Taurus. The soil has not suddenly become weak because it can no longer produce endlessly under the same conditions. It is revealing what years of pressure have done beneath the surface. What feels like unusual frustration may be one of the first honest signals that a pattern carried across 15 years has reached a place where continuing exactly as before would cost more than changing. And this brings you to a difficult paradox. The more determined you became to preserve stability, the easier it was to overlook whether that stability was still preserving you. You may have believed that keeping the relationship intact, maintaining the dependable income, protecting the family structure, honoring an old promise, or continuing to be the person everyone relied upon was proof that your foundations were strong. Yet foundations need maintenance too, and endurance can quietly consume the person providing it. Little by little, you can pour your attention into keeping familiar structures standing while your own curiosity, rest, desire, and capacity for renewal receive less room. Because nothing visibly collapses, neither you nor the people around you necessarily recognize what is happening. That is part of what makes this kind of exhaustion so difficult to explain. From the outside, you may still appear grounded, reliable, patient, and remarkably consistent. The person others trust because you rarely abandon something when circumstances become inconvenient. What they cannot see is the private negotiation behind that steadiness. How often you tell yourself to wait a little longer, give it another chance, protect what you have invested, or avoid disturbing a structure simply because rebuilding would require stepping into uncertainty. No photograph of a stable life captures that invisible work. It does not show the mornings when you wake already tired of maintaining something you once loved maintaining, or the moments when a familiar obligation suddenly feels much heavier in your hands. And because each sacrifice can look reasonable on its own, the accumulation may remain hidden until even you begin to wonder why something so ordinary has become so exhausting. That is where the image of 15 years becomes meaningful, not as a fixed law written into Taurus, but as a way of imagining how many seasons a pattern can survive before its accumulated weight becomes visible. 1 year of staying may look like patience. Several years may look like commitment. Enough years can make the structure feel inseparable from who you are. Eventually, however, even deeply rooted things reveal whether the ground around them still allows growth. Recognizing that can hurt more than continuing automatically. Awareness asks you to look at each small investment, the extra responsibility, the postponed desire, the familiar compromise, the plan you kept following because changing it seemed wasteful, and acknowledge how those choices gathered over time. But recognition also gives you something automatic endurance never could, the ability to choose what deserves another season of your life. So what begins to change when you finally allow your own growth to matter as much as what you have been preserving? At first, probably very little that anyone else can see. You still go to work, answer messages, care about the people you love, protect what genuinely matters to you, and move through familiar routines, but internally, you begin making distinctions that were once blurred together. A desire you kept postponing may start returning with greater clarity. You may admit that a job can be secure without being right for you forever, or that a relationship can contain years of meaningful history without requiring you to remain inside an outdated version of it. You may even begin noticing that some of what you called stability was actually familiarity, and familiarity and safety are not always the same thing. As you change, the structures around you respond. relationships built on mutual care may have enough room to adjust when you express different needs, while arrangements that only function because you carried more than your share may suddenly feel less stable. That does not automatically mean those relationships must disappear. It simply reveals which ones can grow with you and which ones depended heavily on you remaining exactly where you were. There is a particular fear beneath this process that deserves to be named gently. If you stop holding everything as tightly as before, what will still be secure? If you reconsider the commitment, alter the routine change, the financial plan, speak a need that complicates the familiar arrangement, or stop being endlessly dependable, will you discover that some of the stability surrounding you existed only because you never allowed yourself to move? That fear has understandable roots. If predictability once protected you from uncertainty, if being dependable helped you feel valued, or if tangible security became the ground beneath your emotional life, then change can register inside you as danger even when your circumstances no longer require that response. The old structure may feel safer simply because you already know every room inside it. But something important becomes visible when you begin giving yourself permission to move. The relationships with genuine roots do not necessarily collapse because you grow. Often they develop new ways of meeting you. The forms of security that truly support you can adapt, while those that require your permanent self-denial reveal just how conditional their stability always was. None of this requires you to become someone who abandons things easily. You do not have to reject your patience, your loyalty, your appreciation for comfort, or your instinct to build carefully rather than chase every passing possibility. Those qualities can remain deeply valuable parts of you. What changes is the assumption that proving those qualities means staying indefinitely. The shift can begin with something almost invisible. Before saying yes to another obligation, you give yourself a moment to notice whether you genuinely want to carry it. Before deciding that something must be preserved because you've already invested years in it, you ask a quieter and more revealing question. Am I protecting something that still has value? Or am I protecting something that still has value? Or am I protecting something because it is familiar? That pause may feel awkward at first. There will be times when you notice only afterward that you stayed silent, accepted the responsibility, postponed the change, or returned automatically to the safest available choice. There may also be moments when choosing differently creates more anxiety than relief, because an old pattern can feel comforting even while you are beginning to outgrow it. Those moments do not erase the change already taking place. New roots need time to enter new soil, and a life organized around years of endurance will not reorganize itself through one perfect decision. What matters is that you continue noticing the difference between conscious commitment and automatic preservation, allowing each small moment of awareness to create a little more space around what has been tightly held. Eventually, the pause itself can become familiar. You may no longer need to force yourself to question every decision because your sense of security begins expanding beyond repetition, longevity, and the reassurance of knowing exactly what comes next. Stability starts becoming something more alive, not a container that prevents movement, but ground strong enough to let you move without believing that every change is a threat. And perhaps that is the deeper transformation hidden inside this 15-year pattern. You are not being asked to tear up your roots or deny the seasons that shaped you. You are learning that roots were never meant to remain trapped simply because the first container once kept them safe. The strength you used to preserve what mattered can gradually become the same strength that helps you recognize when something needs more room, richer soil, and a different season in which to keep growing. What you may have been calling 15 years of karma was never a sentence handed down to you. It can be understood more gently as a long season of accumulation, the time it took for an old way of creating security to reveal both what it gave you and what it quietly cost. Somewhere beneath all those years of holding, preserving, and enduring, another truth may have been trying to reach you. Real stability is not measured by how long you can keep something unchanged, but by whether what you are protecting still has room to live. A tree does not prove its strength by refusing every season. It remains rooted while responding to rain, drought, cold, heat, loss, and new growth. And there is an important difference between being deeply grounded and becoming unable to move, simply because movement feels unfamiliar. One is resilience. The other can slowly become a form of confinement disguised as security. That distinction matters for Taurus because your instinct to preserve can carry enormous value. You may still care deeply about loyalty, consistency, financial security, familiar places, meaningful possessions, and relationships built over many years. And none of those things need to become less important simply because you are changing. What shifts is your willingness to include your present needs when deciding what deserves another season of your devotion. Perhaps that is what this 15-year pattern has really been revealing. Not that you were wrong to stay, wrong to build carefully, or wrong to protect what once made you feel safe, but that something can serve you faithfully for years without being required to serve you forever. A structure can have been necessary once and still become too narrow for the life now growing inside it. There is something quietly beautiful about using 15 years as an image for this kind of realization. 15 years can hold countless ordinary seasons, workdays, relationships, routines, responsibilities, purchases, promises, and choices repeated so consistently that eventually they begin to look like identity. Yet what has been repeated for years is not automatically what must be repeated next. You are not leaving behind the Taurus who learned how to endure. That version of you may have carried you through uncertain circumstances by finding solid ground, protecting resources, honoring commitments, and staying when staying required remarkable patience. There is no need to reject that part of yourself. It may simply no longer need to carry every old responsibility in order to prove that its strength was real. And there may never be one dramatic day when you can point to the calendar and say, that was when everything changed. More often, these shifts arrive almost quietly enough to miss. One day you reconsider a responsibility before automatically accepting it, and another day you realize that changing a familiar routine does not make your entire life unstable. Perhaps you allow yourself to rest without immediately turning rest into another task to justify. Perhaps you look at something you have kept for years, a role, an expectation, a financial habit, even a relationship, and realize that honoring its history does not require giving it unlimited access to your future. These are small moments, but small moments are often where deeply rooted patterns first begin making room for something different. You may also discover that saying no does not always destroy trust. Changing direction does not automatically erase everything you invested before, and releasing one responsibility does not make you unreliable. Sometimes the most mature expression of commitment is recognizing when your relationship with something must change so that neither you nor what you value is maintained through exhaustion. This is a different kind of steadiness from simply keeping everything where it has always been. Imagine a plant finally moved from a container its roots have outgrown. For a while, the new space can feel unfamiliar, and the roots may need time to settle into soil they have never touched before. Yet the extra room is not instability. It is precisely what allows the plant to become more firmly rooted without having to remain compressed. And perhaps that is the quieter lesson hidden inside what you have called karma. Security does not have to mean preserving every structure that once protected you. Just as growth does not require destroying everything you have built. You can remain grounded while reconsidering, loyal while changing, careful while opening a door you once kept closed. The most meaningful signs of that change may be almost ordinary. You begin choosing where your energy goes instead of assuming everything familiar deserves it. You stop using the number of years invested as the only measure of value. And you notice when your body tightens around an obligation your mind keeps calling safe. Gradually, stability becomes less about preventing movement and more about trusting that you can move without losing yourself. That may be where the 15-year story starts taking on a different meaning. Those years do not have to become evidence that you waited too long or held on too tightly. They can become the seasons that taught you exactly how endurance feels from the inside, including the moment when endurance begins asking to evolve. The ground you cultivated was not wasted simply because you are beginning to imagine planting differently. And what comes next does not need a fixed date or another invisible clock counting somewhere behind your life. It can unfold through the simple experience of discovering that your roots belong to you, not to the container that happened to hold them for so long. As that understanding settles deeper, you may find yourself creating a form of security that still honors everything Taurus values, while leaving enough open soil for desires, relationships, choices, and versions of yourself that have not yet had the space to grow.